Excuse me, Cotton?
Yes?
Sorry, is this a bad time?
No, I was just on my way back from the gym, and,
Oh, perfect. You'll understand me perfectly then.
Excuse me?
Cotton, there just isn't a single weapon in the game that truly takes advantage of my massive amount of strength.
But what about the greatsword, or the hammer, or the hunting horn?
I've tried them. It's just, they don't feel anything close to her.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, there are 14 weapons currently in our wonderful game, and for many people, this is enough. In fact, for a ton of people who only use one weapon, this is arguably more than enough. But variety is the spice of life, people, and really the only downside to adding more weapons to the game is more development time and more balancing. But in a game that already has 14 weapons, surely it couldn't be that hard to just add one more, right? So today, my vivacious little violets, I present to you my ideas for the top 5 weapon types to be added to the Monster Hunter series, with the idea being that it has to be interesting enough to actually make a full weapon off of, it has to be realistic to see within the main series Monster Hunter universe, and of course it has to be different enough from our existing 14 weapons so as to not just be, boring. I also am not a game designer, and I don't pretend to understand the perfect balance of a weapon, but I just want to share some ideas with you guys and start a discussion in the community. Really see what we can come up with as a team. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with
Number 5.
We're gonna be rich. Hey, you and me, mate. Go and get the car.
He robbed every bank in Australia at least once. Then he came to America for a fresh target set.
The Big Boomerang.
yes, a giant boomerang. And this is probably the most full-on weird thing that I have on the list, but also it has the history in Monster Hunter games, both with little boomerangs already existing, and with Prowler being a thing in Generations and Generations Ultimate. And honestly, that's the main inspiration for me. A lot of people, when it comes to new weapons, have talked about bringing Prowler back just as a whole. And while I'm not against that by any means, I can understand why Capcom wouldn't want to add in a system like that plays almost like an entirely different game, with your health and lives not even working remotely the same way. That said, why not just take the more general attack style of the Prowler, specifically the ranged attacks, the giant-ass boomerangs, and make it into a full-on weapon for hunters?
Why must you destroy the things I love?
First off, visually, tell me you can't imagine some super fucking badass giant boomerang designs. Like, it's basically just a big slab of potential. Literally, it can be formed however you want, and whatever monster bits could be all over it, as long as you keep the somewhat general shape required for it to actually, function as a boomerang and come back, instead of just throwing it and having it go nowhere. But visually, I could see some totally fantastic boomerang designs. And combat-wise, we already know this works super well. It has an established moveset that mixes charging moves and combos, and I picture this as a proper hunter weapon, feeling sort of like a medium-range greatsword. Big, chunky hits, slow movement while holding it, but faster while it's in the air, because, hey, when you throw it, you're not holding it, and it's heavy, so you're faster when you're moving. I think that'd be cool. And if you really wanted to make it complex, you could have different types of boomerang that either do piercing damage or KO damage. Okay, maybe that's just a bit too far. Honestly, even if it literally came back to the series with the mechanics of the Prowler boomerangs, I think I'd be happy to play with this weapon.
Number 4.
But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
Chain Blades.
Or at least that's the pop culture version of what I'm thinking about. Hear me out on my very base thought here. What if we had a full-on weapon type based around the clutch claw? Either chain blades or a single blade attached to a rope, or even something like literally just a really big claw that you can actually wield while still functioning as a clutch claw. The first thing that brings me here, honestly, is that I think there is a decent chance that the clutch claw and all of its interesting little bits and pieces don't end up making it into the next entry of the series. The next full-on Monster Hunter game. It's just too, unnatural, for lack of a better word, for a number of weapons. The effects of tenderization and flint shots are just too significant to ignore, but too many people have to go far out of the natural combat of their weapon to make use of it, with some significant exceptions, of course. But let's say for the sake of argument, next game, no Clutch Claw. How do we not waste all the time and effort the development team put into this mechanic? Well, why not have it fleshed out into the new 15th weapon? High risk, high reward. Latching onto monster parts left and right while trying to avoid getting hit by attacks. Of course, tenderizing and flint shots wouldn't really work as it would be far too overpowered to have those be mechanics that only 1 out of 15 weapons had access to, but if you made the weapon so that I could just grab onto whatever part it wanted and freely attack while attached until either you ran out of stamina, got hit by an attack, or jumped off manually, you could play around with the melee combos while attached. Make some attacks and combos do different amounts of damage to different types of parts, like certain combos are better when you're attached to a wing or a head or a tail or something like that, with big meaty finishers that launch you off the creature a safe distance. Really dig into the whole risk-reward factor and benefit a player for knowing the way that a monster moves and the way that a monster fights. Honestly, I think there's a world where even if the Clutch Claw stays in for future games, Chainblade as a general idea could make an appearance. I think they're just too interesting of a weapon to ignore completely forever, but the ideal situation for this, for me, is the one in which this just is the final form of the Clutch Claw.
Number 3. Gauntlets.
Now this one was originally just going to be some sort of hand-to-hand combat weapon, a sort of fist-fighting idea, but then came the thought that if you punched a monster, it wouldn't really hurt the monster. And then also the thought that, you know, most monsters have a lot of, like, genuinely pointy bits, and regardless of hurting them, if you punch them, it would probably hurt you far worse.
Oh! Canada! That's not good.
But that was when Josh reminded me of my favorite design from the custom weapon design contest for Iceborne a few months ago, the Rocket Fist Gun Lance, which by the way still should have won, but this works, doesn't it? If you forget about the Iron Man style palm firing, these could totally work as a base design for power gauntlets, essentially large fist weapons that allow you to just straight up punch the monster without hurting yourself and while hurting them. I could see monster specific designs translating quite well to giant fist gauntlets. Attack-wise, it would clearly be blunt damage, and I picture this weapon to be far more timing-based than combo-based. Something like triangle is your left hand, circle is your right hand, and there's a sort of cooldown period between triangles and circles, so you have to alternate them purposefully. And you can either mash them back and forth for super quick punches, which do great element and status damage, or charge them. Charge the attacks for slow punches, relentless, powerful, big hits for raw. No matter what when doing these punches, you'd have to be rooted to the spot if we want it to be a functioning endless combo that doesn't break game balancing. But that's where my last idea for this comes in. With this weapon, what if instead of the normal dodge roll that all hunters have, you just have a sidestep covering less distance, but it has a sort of guard point to it, if you will, where if you iframe dodge with this weapon, and I mean this would have to be like the tightest window in the game for it to function properly, you dodge the attack and do a sort of automatic counter punch. In my mind, this makes a style that is basically just punching the crap out of a monster in your openings, and then trying to super slick dodge them like you're a boxer while they're hitting you. At least that's how I picture this weapon, and I think it could be really fun.
Number 2.
I'll have you know I have the reflexes of a cat and the speed of a mongoose. Throw it! I dare ya!
Spear.
And this one has some interesting little connotations too, as it would need a bit of a shift from another weapon, honestly. As a base, the spear could definitely be like a grounded insect glaive without the bug, except of course the attacks would be much less spinny because it only has one blade, and would probably wind up being more of a collection of sweeps and jabs, with my favorite little bit to add is a bit of a throwing mechanic. Because honestly, who doesn't like throwing mechanics?
Somebody's throwing stuff.
So let's say that you can just straight up lob this thing into the monster and it sticks to whatever part it hits. You're useless without the spear in your hand, so you have no offense or defensive capabilities, but you get a special animation where when you walk up to the monster, you can jump up to the part it is attached to and rip it the hell out really badassly. Sort of like the opposite of the animation of Switch Axe's zero-sum discharge for a decent chunk of damage, and I'd throw in some bonus part damage just to give the specific move a little bit of an identity as a serious part breaker, so it's just an option the weapon has, rather than devolving the spear into throwing and picking up a weapon over and over. That said, imagine 2 spear users using this attack. think it would be simultaneously funny and really, really cool. And with the fact that the basic attacks would be somewhat similar to Insect Glave's grounded style, I think you could take this opportunity to really push Insect Glaive more towards aerial combat. And then people who enjoyed the grounded Insect Glaive would probably still get a kick out of the brand new spear. All of this said, this is definitely one of the simpler ideas here, both as a base concept and in actual functionality. I mean, I spent all of 5 seconds talking about the basic attacks, but I don't think it would need more than that for the basic ones. After all, it is a spear. It is a set, real-life weapon with real-life capabilities, and personally, I think that this version of the spear would work great if it came to Monster Hunter in the future.
Number 1.
All right, I've run out of patience. On to ruse! Nice job, kid.
The Great Shield.
Alright, okay, I'll admit to a touch of personal bias on this one. The Great Shield was a weapon I came up with a few months after the release of base Monster Hunter World, but still vehemently believe in to this day. Imagine a weapon that upon first inspection wasn't a weapon at all necessarily, but simply a massive shield, half of which attached to either of your forearms and could be put together in combat to make a massive defensive wall.
The way this weapon becomes a shield is by connecting the two halves. Think sort of like if Captain America in Infinity War could put his arms together like this shitty paint drawing and make one really big shield.
Thanks for the input, Past Cotton. When split, these wind up sort of like super slow, blunt dual blades, but the main mechanic of this weapon would of course come from the way that it guards. Being that these shields are normally in two halves, your guard animation would put them together to make one big, well, great shield. In the exact moment these come together, there would be a guard point, with full guard 5 and guard up applied, so you don't need guard skills if you use it properly. But the main function of this is what I like to call elemental absorption, where if you guard point an elemental or status attack, you absorb the power of this ability to enhance your attacks for a short time, with the amount of damage gained depending on the strength of the ability that you guard pointed. Let's say that you stop a Teostra Supernova, for example. Your weapon gets plus 500 fire damage for 60 seconds, just as an arbitrary number. This would be on top of whatever base element or status the weapon already has. So it'd be plus 500 fire damage on a weapon that might already have 500 water damage, and it would really power you up with a heavy risk-reward system. Sure, I know the element that a monster uses is generally something they're resistant to, but it's bonus damage. It's not like that's the only element your weapon has, it's just an extra. It adds on to your weapon. And I could really see this weapon being something that truly rewards great defensive play with great offensive benefits. And of course, there are silly things too, like a sleight attack would essentially just be... but without the bow, so like more like a toboggan. Sorry for making it seem cooler for a second, but honestly this weapon is my baby, and these ideas came to me before I even knew that guard points were like a thing. Like in the original video for this, I actually explained the entire concept of guard points like it was a new thing that I'd just come up with and decided I was going to call it parry, because I hadn't played weapons with guard points in Monster Hunter yet, and therefore I had no idea that they actually existed. In hindsight, that part's hilarious, but the weapon itself, it's still totally solid, at least to me. I would absolutely love to see some version of this make it into the game someday, even if that is just some sort of personal pipe dream. Alright everyone, I've been Cotton Dinosaur, and these have been my top 5 weapon types to be added to the Monster Hunter series. How would you change or enhance the weapon ideas that I've shared? What full-on weapon ideas do you think would be better? Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. This is the brand new outro to tell you all the things that you do that we love, so let's start with something simple and say, oh, we love your eyes. When they're watching us play video games, we make a bunch of jokes that are kinda lame, or when they gaze upon our failures as we try to kill the monsters or important news about the Kingdom Animalia. Rage, Cotton, and Hollow are all here, talking about the things you want to hear, so if you want to be the first to hear, like and subscribe and the bell and we'll cheer. Some of you are patrons even though we are all the noobs and you're the pros. There's nothing we can do to thank you. No, really, there's nothing we could possibly do. Goodbye.